Hi there, traders. This is Brad Gilbert with the Daily Market Insight for Thursday, the 8th of June. All right, now just having a quick look at the global markets. There's not a hell of a lot going on, right? Because, some of the big events that we need to see are next week. A little bit about oil, the Turkish lira. These things are just filling slots on the news services themselves. So you can generally tell what's coming out on the global markets. If you check the global markets page, if there's not much there, they're clutching at straws. But what has been happening, there's been a bit of action on the, obviously the central banks. Bank of Canada, now 0 for 2 this week on central bank announcements. The RBA, I didn't expect them to rise, and there's been a bit of a backlash about them raising rates, but it sets us up for a good trade when the markets start to sort of really get fully impacted by that. Same with Bank of Canada, although the Bank of Canada have come out and said we may have to raise again, right? So, but we're not seeing that follow through move in the markets. Now, Yellen, she used to be in charge of the Fed, says US inflation easing as some sectors slow. It's like she's trying to make the decision, right? She's a politician now. So that's where we are. And when you come back and have a look at the global, I was going to say the global market, but have a look at the front page of the markets. You can see generally here, this is the main page. You can tell, obviously, there's not a lot going on if the main story is the east coast of the US blanketed by Canadian smoke, right? Which is obviously a story in itself, but not much to do with the financial markets. Just having a look at the charts, this is like the second week of the month. It's almost a little bit eerie because occasionally, I think it's like every second month or thereabouts, the US CPI numbers come out. This month, it's the third week. So when we are looking at the financial markets, if you just had a glance across the charts and didn't know what was coming out, you'd probably think nothing had come out. Right? Nothing's really moving much at all. It's like gold is frozen. Same with oil. You're getting a bit of a sideways movement now on the equity markets, a little bit of a pullback on the NASDAQ, which I think is massively overdone. And I tell you what, if you're holding cryptos, you're getting a wild ride there as well. So then you come into the, let's just have a quick look at the currencies, and I'll come into the data we've got coming out today. Now, once again, obviously the dollar index, just a little test of the downside there. Same for dollar yen, dollar Swiss. See all these little false moves. Okay, that tells you like there's traders out there sort of managing positions in the banks, but that's about it. Now there's that spike in the CAD, the raise of Canadian interest rates. You see CAD rise against the dollar, but it came straight back, which tells me that not necessarily that it was factored in. The surprise spike tells you it wasn't. But the market isn't worried about what they're doing. Now, the Aussie, unfortunately for Lee, hit the top there and sort of is coming back. Now, the Aussie GDP numbers came out very weak. I was talking about this yesterday. The RBA is going to have their hands full. All the Aussie economic indicators are weak, and that's going to be a better trading opportunity for us going forward, right? The Kiwi just following the Aussie. Now, what I want to show you is Euro. This is pretty typical of the markets that don't have clear direction. What I'm talking about is the dollar, and we'll come into this. Next Tuesday's CPI number is the key event. So all we've seen this week on a lot of instruments is a lot of false breaks. Okay, you see that on a lot of the pairs up the top here. And on the Euro, you've seen a false break to the downside and top side, right? So just be aware, we aren't seeing the follow-through moves at the moment, and you've got to plan for that. So to me, all we're doing is slowly widening out the trend lines, and funnily enough, you're straight back in the middle of the range. Right, so that sets us up, right? So we know the market is waiting, and traders, over the course of a week or two, if they haven't seen anything specific, they start to get a bit itchy at the banks, right? You're starting to look for opportunities and trying to make things happen. So what you've got to do at this point is just maintain your discipline, right? And follow the gravy trail, right? So there's a bunch of Japanese data coming out here. Now, I spoke to a few guys. Don't get too caught up in the Japanese numbers, right? They don't behave as systematically as everything else. So if you are looking at the Japanese numbers, what week am I on here? This has changed for me. Let me go back to this week. I was just having a look at the US CPI numbers there. So just coming down the bottom here, there's a bunch of GDP numbers coming out, amongst other things, out of Japan. Now, these numbers here, right? Now, there is some sort of decent, well, not decent. There's a little bit of variance here in some of the GDP numbers. What you need to do is with the Japanese numbers, see the Japanese numbers, wait for the Japanese equity markets to open, or look at the Japanese futures. The movement will follow what's happening in the equity markets in Japan, right? Not necessarily straight off the actual number. And because these numbers and the behavior of dollar yen is a little bit different than everything else, you really need to see what happens to the equity markets, because it can be sort of variant for whatever reason. And then you can start to trade confidently with the yen and the yen crosses. Okay, I thought I'd just give you the heads up. That just came out. But the real sort of action that we're looking for, I'm not really looking at the balance of trade, to be honest. There's a few EU numbers coming out. Now, once again, the Eurozone is struggling. This could lead to maybe a short-term down trade. The real big trading opportunity for me is going to be Friday, right? Friday's a better trade day. We've got some Chinese inflation numbers important for the Aussie and Kiwi in particular, and Friday's Canadian employment numbers, right? And why I say the Canadian employment numbers, the central bank has just raised interest rates. If these numbers come out really weak, it's a slap in the face to their decision, and you should see a big correction in that Canadian move, right? So that's where we'll get the real follow-on move. But outside of that, the markets, you've seen the charts, we've seen what's going on. There's no real big impacting number, right? And what I'm talking about, if I just come to the top here and scroll the next week's data, you'll see we don't have to wait long, right? Tuesday is and actually next week, there's a whole bunch of really good numbers coming out with UK employment numbers, ZEW numbers out of the Eurozone and Germany, for instance. But the inflation numbers here, we want to see these numbers. It's going to give us a lot of answers around for the equity markets, the major currency pairs, even commodities, right? It'll tell us what the US dollar's doing. It's the global benchmark. So that's what we really need to know to get our hands into these markets. Outside of that, right, there's no need to stop trading. But if you know that the bigger trading opportunities are happening potentially next week after that release, well, maybe just reduce your trade size. The end of this week, it's a chance to put some cash in your account. Now, if you're sitting in front of the screens thinking this is the big one, I think you're sadly mistaken, right? So adjust your risk management and your trading according to the market behavior and what's expected to come out. As I said, next Tuesday's CPI numbers in the US are big. They have a big flow-on effect across the global markets, and that's what we need to be following. Outside of that, keep an eye on your technicals, false breaks. There's quite a few of them. I don't think we're going to see anything run at this point unless we see some brand new crazy news, and I just can't see it at this point. All right, guys, so Thursday, I don't expect a huge amount. Maybe the European session might give us some. The old weekly US jobless numbers, okay, they can come into play, but you really need some variance. So that's all we've got to focus on at this point. All right, guys, hang in there. Good opportunities coming. I'm telling you, it's going to be big next week. All right, cheerio.